Well, greetings everyone, and welcome to our ExchangeCon breakout session on preparing for an Office 365 migration. We're very pleased to have Sherpa Software as a sponsor for this online gathering of some of the leading experts and vendors within the MS Exchange professional community. This is our second annual MS ExchangeCon online event, hosted by msexchange.org, one of the TechGenics network of professional portal sites. My name is Roger. I'll be the event moderator, and I have a few quick housekeeping items as usual before I introduce our presenters. We will be using the Twitter hashtag MSExchangeCon to share information and links to the upcoming breakout sessions throughout today's event, so please join that conversation. You may also use the chat panel during this broadcast to submit any questions or comments. We will address as many questions as possible at the end of the presentation, and we will conclude in time for those of you who will be joining the next breakout session, which will begin approximately 5 minutes after this session concludes. Our first speaker for this session is Lee Benjamin. With over 20 years experience in the messaging industry, Lee is an expert on Microsoft Exchange, having been awarded a Microsoft MVP for Exchange, one of 100 in the world. Since retiring from Microsoft in 1997, he's a highly sought-after consultant for enterprise and medium-sized organizations and software firms. He currently specializes in Exchange 2013 architecture, migration, and upgrade advice from Exchange 2010, 2007, and 2003, and product strategy positioning for ISVs. He also evaluates and does product testing and training. And he's worked with Microsoft's cloud offerings since 2007, supporting customers with evaluations, readiness, and migrations. Lee can be reached at leeb@exchangeguide.com and found at www.exchangeguide.com. Also joining us today is Rick Wilson. As VP of Strategy and Solutions, Rick is part of Sherpa Software's senior management team. He focuses on establishing the organization's strategic direction and formulating specific tactical steps to achieve those goals. As a certified information governance professional through both AIIM and ARMA, he works closely with Sherpa partners and clients to shape the roadmap for Altitude IG, Sherpa's signature platform for policy-driven information governance. And now I'll turn it over to Lee Benjamin to get us started.
Thanks, Roger, and good morning or good afternoon or wherever everybody is, depending on your time zones. Thanks to Roger and msexchange.org, also to Rick Wilson at Sherpa for inviting me to join you today. Wanted to talk a little bit, what we're going to do, we're going to talk a little bit about your migration, but sort of take a slightly different perspective, really, before you begin. And then Sherpa's going to come in. Rick is going to talk a little bit about their Sherpa's perspective, but really looking at the data that you've got there, something that I'll talk about, but he'll dive deeper in. And then Rick and I will do a brief Q&A. Roger's already sort of gone through and talked about myself. Exchange guy, I've been doing email systems forever, particularly around Exchange and Office 365 and anything related. And as you know, because you deal with these technologies, you know, that can include obviously the underlying operating systems, Outlook, which includes Office, virtualization, and so on. And I do a lot of work around that area, and that's enough about me. So, welcome. First thing is, I've got a cloud in here, and it looks like it's a cloud and a lightning and it's kind of stormy weather. That was how I first saw that cloud as well when I was looking for a cloud, but I then saw that a little bit differently, and it may take a little stretch of your imagination, but I'm starting to see coming out of that cloud a second connection. See, that squiggle has classically meant a connection, say a leased line connection from your location to another location, and now we make that connection up to the cloud. And I sort of see on the left there and on the right there a second line coming in, and that really got me to thinking about how we prepare for moving to the cloud. One of the things is my network good enough? And we'll talk about that, and redundancy in my network. So maybe that's a second network connection coming down. So we're going to look at today a little bit differently. This is not just a how to do. It's hard to do a how to do in 15, 20 minutes. But what are the steps you can do to get ready? What should you have already done in order to make your migration smoother? Now, you're already running Exchange. I'm going to take a guess. There's a huge, gigantic installed base for Exchange Server. People have been running Exchange forever. I was involved in Exchange way back to the original 4.0 release. Most people today are running 2007, 2010, 2013. There's probably a few of you out there, if I were to ask you to raise your hands, there's a couple of you out there who was still running 2003, and that's to be expected, and there's probably even a minute number of you still running 2000 or 5.5. So the cloud becomes an option for us. We can move to Office 365, which is Exchange Online. It's an option. It's been around now for, like I said, I've been dealing with Microsoft's cloud offerings since 2007, when they really put their foot in, and they're really significant at this point. And Exchange Online is a part of Office 365, and the economics are really, really good. And so significant movement from organizations. Where are you today? You're either testing the waters, already made a decision, or your boss said, we're going to 365. So those are sort of the camps that people are in. It doesn't matter exactly, but as we'll see as we go to the next slide, well, let's do migration methods first. Sorry. Out of the box, or out of the cloud, Microsoft has a number of methodologies, if you will, on how to move everything up to Exchange. And this is one of the first decisions you'll need to make. It's a cutover migration, a staged migration, and a hybrid migration. So a cutover migration says, I'm going to move everything within a very, very short period of time. So Exchange is going to do one big move to Office 365 of all your data. It's going to sync it, and then you're going to do a flash cut. Now, it's for 2,000 user organizations or smaller, so that cuts out the very large ones, and it works actually back to Exchange 2003. So cutover migration is an option. Stage migration is in between what I'm about to talk about. It says, yeah, you can move everything in batches, but the goal is completely online. Now, the way that this works is you're going to hand over, you're going to move your directory, your login, and your data to Office 365. And so that's what Stage looks like. For organizations that need to maintain or want to maintain Active Directory and perhaps even some Exchange on premises, there's the hybrid. Hybrid is a little bit trickier to do, but what it gives you is the same look and feel. So I can send mail between people who are in my organization and who are up in my organization in the cloud. So DirSync is a whole process that you need to set up, perhaps with single sign-on or password sync, that basically says, hey, I have Active Directory on premises. I have Active Directory where my central location is, and we're going to synchronize that to Active Directory in the cloud for Office 365. Once you've done that, we can bring in free and busy sync. Free and busy between the two parts of your organization. You don't get this with the other ones. Cutover, again, is a flash cut. Stage won't give you free and busy. So if I want to know, I want to be able to have calendar sharing, free and busy, between a person who's on premises running Exchange and a person who's in the cloud running Exchange Online. Office 365. They're sort of interchangeable, and I'll bounce back and forth. Exchange Online being a part of Office 365. Also being able to see your public folders before you migrate them. So if you've got public folders on premises, your Exchange 365 users can see those until you migrate those and you flip them over. Now this one is only limited to Exchange 2013 and Exchange 2010. Now, there's some other options from Microsoft and others. So, least common denominator is IMAP. IMAP is a protocol for picking up your mail, like Pop3 IMAP 4. Basically says, I can open a mailbox. Okay? I can pull your mail, whatever's in there, and move that. So, who falls into that category? Older Exchange systems. As I said, if I had you raise your hands, a couple of you, not many, just a couple, would raise their hands with Exchange 2000 and maybe Exchange 5.5, though I haven't seen that hand raised up in quite a while. Other systems, Domino and Notes, or GroupWise, I can pull in via IMAP. Other hosted services. So let's say that you've had people who are using Gmail or using Yahoo. And you want to bring in those. The way you would bring those in is with the IMAP method. Now, there are other tool sets from third parties, and I'm not going to go into them, but there are other tools to help you migrate data to pick up the mailboxes and offer you different or additional customization and control. Okay. How do you know you're ready? There's a couple of tools out there that I'll steer you to. One is the Health Readiness Connectivity Checks. And if you just search on that, you'll find it. It's a Microsoft tool that's part of Office 365, but it sort of says, hey, what's going on in my environment? Is there anything that I need to take care of? We'll dive into that a little deeper. Exchange Server Deployment Assistant. The Exchange Server Deployment Assistant is a step-by-step process on what do you need to do in order to move forward with one of the migration methods that Microsoft offers. It's a great tool. It's a great checklist. You still may go off and do some research on particular steps, but it's a good way to keep up with what do you need to accomplish, and Microsoft keeps it up to date as well. I always wondered about objects in mirror are closer than they appear. Right? You've all seen that in your passenger side mirror. And I've always been I finally went and I said, okay, what does that mean? Well, the reason is you're sitting further away from that mirror, and that mirror is actually concave. Okay, now I understand it. Why do I put this in here? I'm just making the point that things will not go exactly as you want them to. I've done hundreds of migrations over the years. They are never perfect. There's always some surprises. Something goes a little bit wrong. Question is how quickly you can recover. You can prepare your users for change, but they're still not going to like it. So what can we do to minimize the impact? And that's really the heart of what I want to talk about today. Classic planning. Classic planning is a vital, vital part of doing a project like a mail migration. What can I take care of right now? First thing is, what's going on inside your current Exchange environment? If you've got a problem, it's going to bite you later. I promise you that it will. And it will fail on you. It'll bite you right in the middle of your migration. So understand what those problems are. I know you've got a list. You've got a list and say, this has been a little flaky thing. It's in the background and so on. Deal with it if you can now, or at least understand it very well. So let's say you've got a database that has a habit of going offline every few weeks. Okay? Oh, it's real easy. You just remount the database, right? But you've never taken the time to figure out what's going on here. Now, you don't want that to fail right in the middle of a move, a remote move up to the cloud, because that's going to be a bigger problem. So what is it that I can do about that? Great. Business drivers. Again, this is very classic planning things. I personally don't care why you're moving to 365 and who the stakeholders are, but I think it'll be useful to you, right, to really understand that says, okay, the business is doing this because, and who's in charge, right? Who's the group that you need to make sure are going to be the happiest in this, okay? If the stakeholders are a particular group, a particular division of the company who are really driving this, then you want to make sure that they're a little happier than everybody else. Can we do that? Sure. How are you really using Exchange? No, not just email and calendaring, okay? I know that you're using it for email and calendaring, but how much? How much data do you have that goes in and back and forth? How much mail transitions on a daily basis? How much spam? How are you handling spam? Do you know how much there is? So that when you get to Office 365 and you start seeing, gee, I'm getting more spam than I expected to, because I know what I used to get, and now I'm getting more than that. Public folders. Whole big discussion. Are we using public folders? What are we storing in public folders? Are you one of the few organizations that actually wrote applications in public folders? Relays. How else are we using Exchange? Relays. So call it a relay, but a printer that's set up in your location that actually can scan and send email. See, that's talking to Exchange. Okay, that's talking to an Exchange. There's a receive connector set up for that somewhere, and you need to understand that. You also need to plan and say, how am I going to do that after I move everything to Office 365? Or maybe I end up leaving a few of those things around so that I can do a hybrid. Or what other old connectors? You have a fax connector. Anyway, these are the kinds of things you need to be thinking about. Now, on-premises and Office 365, they're almost the same, but not quite. So we'll talk in a second about some of the differences that you're going to see. But this is one of the areas that you may be a little bit surprised about. So in looking at this, thinking about features, are there particular features within Exchange or your other email system that you rely on today, and they may be slightly different inside of Office 365, so you need to understand those, look at those, and prepare your users for it and say, hey, we have a feature that's a little bit different than what you're used to, but it'll accomplish the same thing. More in your network. I talked about this in the very beginning with my little my little arrows there from coming down from the cloud. Is your network reliable? Is it sufficient capacity? Is it redundant? Now, we don't think of these things all the time. Reliable, but if you're relying on, if you've got 50 people in your home office who are connecting up to the cloud every single day, that's your main population. You've got a lot of distributed population as well, but the main people, is that going to be there all the time, or is that going to get in the way of my migration? Is it heavily used such that you don't have enough capacity to start moving mailboxes? You're just going to bring it to its knees. And redundant. What happens if you lose your primary connection to the internet for those 50 people? Do you have another way to connect? Do you have a second connection? Do you have a second internet service provider? What does your connection actually look at? What firewalls do you have? What proxy devices in the middle? Intrusion prevention devices? Any of these things that can get in the way, so understand what they are. Monitoring and support. It's going to break. It always breaks. Mail systems do that. How do I know? Well, you probably have a little routine where you send email to yourself from your outside account, and then you reply to it, and that's okay. Guess what? I know it sort of works. Define those tests. Send, receive, external, between on-prem and 365. Also, if you get into Active Directory Federation services, first thing, you want to have tests for that as well. How do I know that ADFS is actually up and running in my organization? I found a couple little browser tests that are very simple, very easy to accomplish, and I check those. Free and busy. Make sure that you test free and busy. I mean, you're going to test it before you do the migration, but you're going to test it during the migration as well, and be able to sort of test that. Now, public folder access as well. One of the things I thought about in this is Anytime you do an upgrade, we'll talk about upgrades in a moment. Anytime you do an upgrade, you may break one of these things. It happens. So when I do an upgrade, I want to do all my tests. All right? I've set up, I've gotten permission from senior management for downtime. I'm going to take downtime at 7 o'clock Friday night, and we're going to upgrade to the latest updates. I should test it before to make sure I can send receive mail, and test it right after. So if something is broken, you have a series of tests. I assume you've got help desk procedures. How do you know as you move somebody along? You've migrated them up to the cloud. You've now got them connecting with their device, and they're having problems with ActiveSync on whatever device they're using, whether it's a Windows type phone or an Apple iPhone or an Android or whatever. Who are they going to call so that you can figure out? Best test tool in the world will become your friend if it's not already for Exchange, and for many of you it may be already, but for connecting to Office 365, Exchange Remote Connectivity Analyzer, EXRCA. It goes from external to looking into your network to make sure that all the connectivity pieces are there. Can I log on? Can Outlook do auto discover? Things that we'll talk about next. Fix, remediate, fix what you can. So latest updates. Okay, the latest updates for Exchange 2003 is CU6, 2010 is SP3RU7, 2007 SP3RU14. You need to be up at the latest versions in order to migrate, especially with hybrid. If you're running hybrid, if that is you're synchronizing between the organizations, and you're still going to have some Exchange on premises, your Active Directory is going to remain on premises, you are required to run the latest or the previous Exchange release. So 2013, that means CU5 or CU6. What versions of Outlook are you running? Requirements, you can run Outlook 2013, 2010, 2007, 2011 for the Mac. What are you running in your organization today? How big a change is that going to be? If there are licensing pieces I'm not going to get into, but you can get Office 365 Pro Plus, and the Plus says, hey, you're going to get your software from Microsoft. You'll get your versions of Office directly from there, and they'll update on a regular basis. Or you can continue to have it yourself in your organization. Browser version, latest browser versions. I mean, this is really important. The vendors, Microsoft, Firefox, Google, everybody is getting away from supporting older versions of the browser. They just become too difficult for them. There's too many options. So you're going to get expected to be running the latest versions of whatever browser it is that you choose. Certificates, critically important. Do I already have a public certificate? You probably do for Outlook Web Access, Outlook Web App. You probably already have a public certificate. You're going to definitely need one in order to do hybrid. Public certificates are not expensive. It's going to be used by SMTP, AutoDiscover, ActiveSync, all of these pieces. All of the migration tools are going to want to have access back into your organization, and they're going to use AutoDiscover and sometimes Outlook Anywhere in order to be able to do that. By the way, a little trick on certs. It used to be that you could have server names on your certificates. No more. The certificate vendors have gotten together and said, that's too dangerous, because they can't verify whether you actually own something that you have internal. So they don't know whether a server name is real. They can't validate that. So you can't put NetBIOS names or a server name. Now you can work around that. At a minimum, your certificate's going to have autodiscover.yourcompany.com or org. It's going to have mail. And SMTP. So mail being where OWA connects to, SMTP being where your email traffic comes into. DNS and AutoDiscover. DNS and AutoDiscover are really the heart and soul of not just Exchange, but the way that Exchange and Office 365 communicate. So you're going to want to get these right. Make sure that they're working correctly. You may not be using or aware of auto-discover internally, but it's there and it's automatically set up. Okay. Things are going to look a little bit different, and you need to be prepared for that. So in your planning, you're probably using Outlook and you're using OWA, but what does it mean if you're going to go to a newer version? Okay, how is that going to look? Active Directory. If you're doing hybrid and you want to, you're expecting your users to be in sync. No, it's not different, but the difference is, it's not just Active Directory. It's extending Active Directory and synchronizing that with a piece of Active Directory up in Office 365, or actually in Azure, which is a complement to 365. Web-based Administration Center. Depending what version of Exchange you're running, managing Exchange with the 2013 Our Cloud version is now web-based. It's different than what it was in 2010 and before, and you should be prepared for that, and you should be playing with that and understanding what those differences are. Remote PowerShell. PowerShell is the command language that's being used between the parts of Exchange and between the Administration Center and Exchange and all of the other Microsoft products are using PowerShell as well. You're going to come up to a command, something that you want to do as an administrator, that you can't do inside the GUI, inside the graphical interface, the web-based EAC. And the way you would do it is going to be with PowerShell. Now, there's two kinds of PowerShell people. There's very serious coders, or there's cut and paste scripters. I'm a cut and paste scripter. Okay, I'm not a serious coder. I don't know, how to put an entire script together, but I can look at a script that somebody else has written or a snippet. I can steal that snippet, or I can look at the script and I can go, I just want to tweak it over here in order to make it do what I want to do. So you will get to know PowerShell. You need to get to know PowerShell. Be prepared for different. Where's my message? Used to be I could just look at queues and know where my messages were. But now it's a little bit trickier because I've got queues that are maybe an older version of Exchange and a hybrid server, could be a newer version of Exchange, and then I've got moving up to we say into Office 365, but we're going to go into Exchange Online Protection, which is their anti-spam area, and then it gets to mailboxes. So there's going to be more places for you to look, some new tools, message tracking similar to what you used to do, message tracing within the Office 365 environment. And finally, how long is this all going to take? Well, what can we do to reduce the impact we've talked about? Get your environment in shape, figure out where the problems are, and kick the tires with Office 365 so that you can talk to your users about the differences. Now, haven't talked about, you've got a huge amount of data. If you've been running Exchange for years and years, and I'm going to take a guess that you have been running it for a while, and you've probably done a few upgrades, well, that data doubles every two to 3 years. So you got a lot of information just sitting there. Did you set up sizes, mailbox sizes, limits on those quotas? Maybe the question used to be, how long does it take to back up and restore? And in those days, actually, I didn't care how long it took to back up. The question is, how quickly could I bring back a database? How quickly could I restore it? New question, what do you mean there's no backup? Well, there is not backup in the way that we're classically thinking of backup, or I back up to tape, or I back up to disk. Office 365 has multiple copies of your data. Your data is actually, your mailbox is conceptually stored in 2 different data centers. Okay? So that's how they back up. That's how they handle disaster kinds of things. So if they lose a disk, they've got multiple servers with the data, but it's also replicated between data centers. But I don't have a backup in the way I used to think about it. Okay, talked about limits, quotas, retention policies. did I set up an archive? Did I have a way that I said, hey, everything older than a certain amount, I'm going to move off to an archive? That's actually a good thing. How much data do you need? Well, there's lots of archiving for compliance reasons, e-discovery, personal health information, financial regulations, data loss prevention. I want to watch and make sure I'm not losing anything. So bottom line of all of this, how long will it take? A smaller mailbox is going to be a faster migration. So if you've moved that data out, you're going to have a cleaner, faster time moving along. And with that, I'm going to follow my runner's lead and do a little handoff and hand this over to Rick Wilson at Sherpa to continue talking about what do you have inside your Exchange environment.
Thank you so much, Lee, for providing a really thorough perspective on planning for Office 365 migrations. I'd like to pick up on some of the themes that Lee surfaced by covering these three areas that you see on the slide here. Places where third-party tools can perhaps help you streamline the migration process and maybe even avoid some of those potential pitfalls. First, I'd like to talk about some strategies for analyzing your existing email content. Next, I'll cover a few ways to utilize that analysis and implement content management policy. And then we'll wrap up with some discussion about locating and migrating content outside of the mailbox database, principally in PST files. So we often use this analogy of moving into a new home when we talk about messaging migrations. So clearly moving your family is an exercise that requires a fair amount of logistical planning and coordination prior to the day that this moving van arrives to transport your belongings. And moving your email requires that same degree of thoughtful planning, as Lee very eloquently expressed. There's lots of things to consider. And it's important during that consideration to have answers to questions such as how much content do we have, or how old is that content? The obstacle, though, is that obtaining some of the analytics necessary to answer those questions can be a difficult exercise when you rely solely on the tools that are built into Microsoft Exchange. So as we roll into this next slide, you can see that third-party tools provide you with a quantitative insight into your email environment by gathering analytics directly from the email database. Being able to assess your current environment often yields some really interesting insights into the way that mailbox owners are managing their content. And this slide shows a few examples of the type of content analytics that can be provided by external tools. The chart in the upper left shows the size of a particular Office 365 mailbox over a 90-day span. Now this could be an internal mailbox, it could be, as I said, an Office 365 hosted mailbox. It could even be a different repository. But this type of trend analysis helps you understand the volume of messages that are being received over time by your email users. The example below that, so this would be lower left, provides an age-based analysis of the number of messages in the mailbox environment. That's particularly useful when you're trying to assess how long messages are being retained in mailboxes. And then finally, the pie chart on the right breaks down the type of attachment content that's being stored in the mailbox environments. Attachments comprise such a large part of our overall email storage that it's really helpful to know what type of attachments are the most prevalent, especially since in Office 365 attachments have size limits and how large those attachments may be. So statistics such as these can be a real asset as you evaluate what content to include in your migration. Now that you have a better idea of the content, you can begin to make some decisions about how you want to manage that content moving forward. So in keeping with our analogy of moving your family to a new home, this is sort of the perfect time in that process to look over your belongings with a critical eye. And most people understand the value of sorting through their possessions during the move, weeding out items that are no longer useful. That kind of paring down can bring a lot of benefits. For example, you might need less packing materials or perhaps fewer trucks to move the family belongings. And of course, the big benefit is that means less to unpack in the new house. And applying that same discipline to your email migration can yield some real economic benefits as well. Now, in spite of the fact that Office 365 can support rather large mailbox sizes, One of the key principles of sound information governance is don't try to keep everything. And since email is a category of electronically stored information that can be discoverable during litigation, attempting to retain too much of that content can really escalate the risk profile of your organization. Third-party tools can help you pare down that exposure level by selectively deleting messages that exceed a certain criteria. This particular slide shows two examples of how that content may be targeted. The top graphic represents a retention rule that's being targeted to specific folders in the mailbox. This degree of flexibility allows administrators to target messages using very precise conditions: age, date, size, content criteria, folder, and so forth. The bottom graphic shows an example of selecting content based on size criteria. In this case, any attachment that's over 25 meg. And since Office 365 does not support these large attachments, this is a great strategy for cleaning up that attachment repository prior to the move. You can find those attachments easily and perhaps export them to a network file share or even delete them before the migration begins. Well, I might be stretching this moving analogy to the breaking point, but there's often that one closet in the house that over the years has become a random storage area for items that don't fit neatly into another location. And when you open the door to that closet for the move, it looks sort of like the photo on this slide, almost a scene from one of those Hoarders television programs. That same premise is true in your email environment. We see this all the time when mailbox users fall into the habit of circumventing their storage quotas by dragging large amounts of email content into PST files. And a migration is really an ideal time to deal with this issue as well. The next slide shows how third-party tools can help you identify how far-reaching your PST problem is by locating those files and providing you with an inventory of the content. So on this slide you can see we've got PST files that are located in several workstations out in the environment, and now we've got a view of where that PST file is, how large it is, who owns it, and so forth. Once you know the location of these PST files and their approximate size, you can begin to plan for how that content may be either defensively disposed of or included in your Office 365 migration plan. Our final slide today shows some resources for next steps. Office 365 is really a great alternative for organizations that want a full-featured email environment without the complexity of managing that infrastructure. Sherpa has been helping our clients successfully manage their email environments for over 14 years, and we can help you make that move into Office 365. You can find more information at sherpasoftware.com. To find more about Lee's background and the kinds of resources he can provide, he's available at www.exchangeguy.com. And another option is there will also be an online demo of some of our products attached to this MS Exchange event that you may wish to review in your leisure. So Roger, with that, I'd like to turn the program back over to you for any questions that may have come in.
Great, thanks, Rick. And we do have a number of questions that we're going to dive right into. And I'm just going to throw these out, and please, either or both of you jump in. First question, as we transition from on-prem to Online 365, how do I protect my organization from issues that have appeared in recent updates, CUs and RUs?
I'll take that. So, yes, there have been some hiccups in updates from Microsoft regarding Exchange. It's a very fast-moving environment. The release cadence, or what's happening up on Office 365, is very fast, and even with all testing, any organization, I mean, occasional little hiccups appear. Regarding updates is one that I've said forever, for years and years, and people who've known me before, and if any of you have heard me talk, one of the things is, if you don't need to be first, don't install an update right away. Okay? I mean, security updates are one thing, but updates, roll-ups, cumulative updates, and so on, wait a little while. Listen to the chatter. I don't mean long. I mean probably a couple of weeks. If there's a new feature or capability, I mean the bug fixes are important, but you don't have to be the one who installs it on day one. Particularly, there's the Exchange team, msexchangeteam.com, the blog for the Redmond Exchange teams. Read that on a regular basis. That's where you're going to find out about updates when they're first coming out. By the way, updates for Exchange, they're not pushed to the Windows Update world until a period of time has passed. But anyway, when you read those blog entries, read the question and answers below, the comments, and if people have problems, they're gonna mention them. And yes, even though we've seen some hiccups in the last few releases, Microsoft is very quick about putting up patches, putting up scripts, things that'll work around and solve any issues like that. So listen to the chatter before you jump to install an update. Still important to install them, but give yourself a little bit of time to let somebody else be on the cutting block, on the leading edge.
Good, thanks, Lee. This next one sounds like a question for you, Rick. Can the analytics that were shown in your slide be provided for mailboxes only?
Yes, indeed, Roger. So that is one of the third-party tool questions, and the answer to that is no. The examples we showed were relative to mailbox, but that same kind of analysis can be done to PST files, public folders, even the archive portion of the Exchange mailable mail store.
Okay, next question. Here's good, short and to the point. What will take the most time?
I've thought about this one a bit. So obviously, the obvious one that's going to take time is moving your mailboxes, and both Rick and I have talked about, what can you do to minimize that, to make those smaller if you don't need that old data. Obviously, you need to do it intelligently, think about what I might need for regulations and so on, but moving mailboxes takes time. The one that's going to take time, just because you're not used to it, is setting up and getting DirSync working in your organization. Just because it's a little different. So plan to spend a little extra time to make sure that you've got that process down, that all the components are in line, and that you understand what they're doing, and if there are problems, that you can identify what they are in order to get those back online. So DirSync is sort of a second one that will take up some more of your cycles.
Great. We've got time for a few more. Next question is, I am running an old version of Exchange. So what are my options for the migration?
So talked about that, a number of choices, but the least common denominator for a version that's not supported by one of the main migration methods, the staged or the cutover or or a hybrid, but an older one can use a least common denominator like IMAP. Basically, it's going to open up a mailbox on either end and just move the data, right? So there are always options in order to be able to get things. They may not be as seamless. Yes, one could export everything out to PSTs or try to do this through Outlook, and that's maybe lower than the least common denominator. I don't recommend it. It's just a lot of work to do. So using a tool like IMAP or third-party migration tools.
Great, and we do have a question with regards to PSTs, and we'll have to make this our final question. You mentioned PST files. Can those be migrated directly from the desktop machine to Office 365, or do they need to be centralized somewhere first?
Yeah, Lee, I don't know if you have a perspective on that, but with regards to our tools, at least the Sherpa does, we can process those PSTs in place. You can create a migration rule that runs right on the desktop, calls through that PST content and moves the appropriate messages up to the Office 365 mailbox.
Fair enough, Rick. I was more thinking of the organization who doesn't have a way to migrate and just says, well, that's the only, that's the way to do it. That's the only way to do it. Well, obviously your tools can, you've got tools that actually go in and look at those and be able to more intelligently pull the data out of there. So that's why third parties are involved, like yourself.
Well, with that, we will need to wrap it up. So I want to thank Lee and Rick for all of your great insights. And of course, we want to thank Sherpa Software for making it possible for us to bring you today's event. Don't forget to join us at the next breakout session using the separate link for that session, which is available in your confirmation email and can also be found at the Twitter hashtag MSExchangeCon. And that concludes this session, and you may now disconnect.